Okay, I'm going to do one of these today, and then I'll do some more regular recordings. Spring prayer. It didn't take long for Sylvester to get bored of my pooey chirping, and stop poking me. But in reality, it seemed that rather than getting bored, his interest had just shifted to something else. "What's this thing?" he murmured before pulling my hair stick right out. Before I could react, my hair was falling down behind me. I shot my head up and saw that Sylvester was looking over the ornamental hair stick that my family had made me. He looked to be an adult in his late 20s, and yet his behavior was exactly that of a wild elementary school boy, unpredictable and unrestrained. "He'll break it," I realized, and the blood drained from my face. "Please give it back." I reached my hand out. My plea made Sylvester grin like the Cheshire Cat. He raised his hand higher than I could reach. Well, that's not too difficult considering how tiny you are. And shook the hair stick, telling me to try and get it. As far as I could tell, he had absolutely no intention of giving it back to me. "Give it back!" I chased after Sylvester, jumping up to try and grab the hair stick as he moved it around to keep it out of reach. I ran out of breath in no time. "I'm asking you to give it back. It's my hair stick. The hair stick my father and mother and sister made. Jeez, I hate boys like this." Looked up at the hair stick dangling above me and clenched a fist, eyes narrowed. I could feel the mana inside of me heating up my entire body, rising forth as anger consumed me. "Apprentice, no!" Daniel cried out in a panic, leading both Karstedt and the High Priest to turn around and shoot their eyebrows up in anger. They took out their shining wands and swiped them through the air. "You fool, I told you not to tease her too much. Do not bully a small child." Two sharp chops landed on Sylvester's head with a very pleasing thumping sound. Their shining wands had transformed into maces before my eyes. I gasped at the thought of how much damage they must have done, but Sylvester himself just shrugged. "Wow, you could shrug that off? Jeez, how durable are you, dude?" Why so angry? I was just playing around a little. Sylvester hadn't learned his lesson at all, but now that I knew Karstedt and the High Priest would punish him whenever he went too far, all the anger boiling up inside of me just faded away. The High Priest snatched the hair stick out of Sylvester's hand and gave it back to me. "You can put this back on yourself, I imagine." "Yes, thank you, High Priest." I quickly bundled my hair back up with the hair stick. Sylvester watched with interest, then reached out for it again. Karstedt smacked his hand away with a roar, then pointed at the quaking Daniel. "Have your fun with Daniel, not mine. He's made of much stouter stuff," he said. "Oh, poor Daniel." The High Priest concurred, shooing Sylvester away. "Indeed, go play with Daniel in the corner, mine. You come here." And so, after picking me up and bringing me to his desk, the High Priest resumed his meeting with Karstedt. They continued poring over the map, blatantly ignoring Daniel's agonizing cries. Oh, poor Daniel. What the fuck is Sylvester doing to him? Speaking of which, the map spread out across the desk made me let out an odd gasp. It was much more detailed than the one I had seen in the Merchants Guild. That one had only shown the names of cities and roads, so this was my first time seeing one that actually depicted the whole duchy. The duchy itself was long but thin, stretched out to the north and south with some areas colored red and others colored blue. It seemed the areas around cities were mostly red, while there was mostly blue. Where there was more blue, the further away from them you went. I wonder what the colors signify. I was curious, but their discussion seemed serious enough that I deemed it better to keep my silence, just keep looking at the map. Yes, that should do. Yes, let us depart then. Once Karstedt and the High Priest had agreed on everything, it was time to head to the Noble's Gate. Daniel, carry mine. Sylvester, take this, and Karstedt this. Karstedt and Sylvester left the room carrying large pieces of luggage while Daniel followed with me in his arms. I whispered into his ear, "Sir Daniel, I would like to stay as far away from that blue priest as possible." "You have no idea how much I agree." Daniel and I saw eye to eye on this matter. He stepped back from Sylvester a little, on guard. You see that despite being a blue priest, Sylvester's family was of an overwhelmingly higher status than Daniel's. Well, I mean, considering Daniel's a lay noble, it's not that difficult to understand that. I wanted to stay as far away from Sylvester as I could for fear of him turning into another Shikikoza when angry, but he actively followed after us. "Aren't you two being a little cold to me?" It must be your imagination, I replied, while looking around for someone who could take care of Sylvester. But Karstad was nowhere to be seen, having already gone off ahead. I looked back over Daniel's shoulder and saw the high priest catching up to us from behind, having finished giving his final orders to his attendants. High priest, I whimpered, waking him from his temple. Sylvester, keep your distance from mine. I do not want to deal with her falling apart before the spring prayer has even begun. She'll have to be pretty weak to fall apart from this. Isn't that kind of pathetic? Sylvester poked my cheek, probably because I was closer to his height now that Daniel was carrying me. Oh, great. The high priest swatted his hand away and gave Sylvester a cold glare. Yes, it is. Mine is so weak and sickly that we must all take great care when dealing with her, however tedious that may be. Do not make me repeat myself yet again. Karstad opened the noble's gate and was waiting for us in the plaza on the other side. He, Daniel, and the high priest summoned high beasts from their facestones while the high priest gave instructions. You lead. Karstad, mine, and Daniel will stay in the middle, while Sylvester and I shall follow from behind. Does that sound good to you, apprentice? Asked Daniel. Sir Daniel, you were not willing to protect me from Brother Sylvester. Oh, God. Daniel hadn't protected me at all from Sylvester's teasing. He hardly seemed like a reliable bodyguard. I would feel much safer riding with the high priest, to be honest, because at least he would protect her. Daniel would, but he was just, I guess, a little caught off guard by Sylvester, and the fact that who he is made that much worse. And that's because Daniel froze mid-sentence. He thought for a moment over whether he should continue, then murmured a quiet, "Forgive me." Daniel's high beast was a winged horse. I got on its back, then Daniel sat behind me and took the reins. The horse spread its wings and flew after Karstad's griffin, which had departed first. Ooh, Karstad rides a griffin. Nice. Once we flew over the lower city and past the outer walls, the griffin immediately began descending. We were heading to the winter mansion of the closest farming town to the south gate. The same town that my neighborhood went to on pig-killing day. The structure was tall and wide like a centuries-old elementary school with a field that resembled a sports ground. Even from high up in the sky, I could tell a ton of people were gathered there. At a glance, it looked like about 1,000 people. How would you even think to guess that? As we descended to the plaza, the people in the middle pushed their way out to make space for us. Karstad gracefully landed in the newly formed clearing and dismissed his high beast as Daniel's winged horse descended next to him. Karstad picked me up from its back, then Daniel slid off and dismissed his high beast as well. Out of the way, Sylvester cried out from above as the high priest's lion descended. Karstad took a few steps back, still holding me in his arms, and looked up as a bluish thing leaped down from the lion with a loud shout. What? What? The crowd stirred at the sudden development, and as everyone watched on, the blue figures flipped into the air for landing and striking. How did you do that without getting hurt? People in this world are more durable. What, do they have aura or something? I'm joking. They don't. His energy seemed contagious. Excitement raced through the crowd, and everyone cheered as if they were watching a show. That idiot's getting carried away. I felt a vague sense of frustration in Karstad's voice, and soon enough the high priest's lion plummeted down as if attempting to smash into Sylvester and crush him. I think he was attempting to do that. Or at least make it look like he was. But he simply dodged with an acrobatic maneuver and struck into the pose. Oh, the crowd cheered even more. Sylvester had a very satisfied smile on his face like an elementary school boy who had just shown off his special talent. Is a spring prayer a ceremony where priests give performances to the people? I murmured, taken aback by how different Sylvester was from the blue priests I knew. Karstad shook his head with a grim expression. Mine, take no heed of him. He has no example to follow, or rather, he is an example of something you must strive to never become. I imagine that Sylvester is a high-ranking noble, considering how casually he interacts with you, Lord Karstad. Will he make unreasonable demands of me like the late Shikikoza once did? I then asked how I could deal with someone who did what they pleased to those beneath him with no ear for protest, which made Karstad look a little conflicted. He is not a violent man. You can rest assured that he will not harm you. He just happens to be unreasonable and a walking headache. Oh boy, wait till you find out who he actually is. Then you're gonna change your tune a little bit. He's still gonna be probably annoying, but yeah. If Sylvester makes unreasonable demands of me, may I come crying to you for help, future adoptive father? I asked, tilting my head ever so slightly to the side. Karsten opened his eyes wide, then gave me a broad grin. Absolutely. Come to me whenever you like. I'll destroy any villain that makes my adoptive daughter cry. Oh, you just tugged at his heartstrings in the right way, mine. My future adoptive father sure is a reliable guy. After I stealthily secured Karstad's backing, the high priest dismissed his lion and started making his way toward a small stage at one end of the field. The people parted as he walked, forming a path directly to the stage for him. Sorry, I'm tired. I just woke up. Yeah, I shouldn't be tired. Meanwhile, Sylvester took out a large chalice, almost 80 centimeters tall, from the bag on his back, holding it reverently while following behind the high priest. Karstad set me down onto the ground and propped me over to follow, but soon realized just how slow my walking speed was and had me back in his arms within seconds. He then strode quickly toward the stage as well, seeing that my walking speed really was unbearable. Wow, I'm only slow because adults have longer legs than me. It's not my fault. That is probably partially the reason. After sitting me down onto the stage, Karstad and Daniel moved to the front and looked out across the crowd with hard looks in their eyes to show they meant business. Sylvester handed the large golden chalice, a divine instrument, to the high priest, who then set it down on top of a large stand placed in the middle of the stage. The spring prayer will now begin. Chiefs of this town and its neighbors, come forth. At the high priest's call, 5 men, each carrying a lidded bucket that seemed big enough to hold 10 liters, climbed onto the stage. Mine, it's time to work. The high priest picked me up and set me down onto the stand with the chalice, since I couldn't reach it on my own. And I walked on my knees across the red cloth that had been spread over the stand. The chalice looked something like a wine glass. Large face stones were embedded along its round bowl, with smaller ones dotting their way along its elaborately decorated stem down to the base. I settled down in front of the chalice and placed my hands on the face stones in its base. O goddess of water flew train, bringer of healing and change, O 12 goddesses who serve by her side. The goddess of earth, Geduld, has been freed from the god of life, Ewigleben. I pray that you grant your younger sister the power to birth new life. The watching crowd stirred as I poured my mana into the chalice, making it shine with a bright golden light. I offer to you our joy and songs of glee. I offer to you our prayers and gratitude, so that we may be blessed with your purifying protection. I ask that you fill the 1,000 lives upon the void mortal realm with your divine color. Once I finished the prayer, both Sylvester and the high priest gently tilted the chalice. A shining green liquid poured over its rim and into the buckets of the lined-up town chiefs. Praise be to Geduld, the goddess of earth, and Flutrain, the goddess of water. Once the first bucket was filled and capped, a portion of the crowd began yelling out prayers and gratitude to the gods. They were probably the villagers of the town that had just had its bucket filled, as simpler cries arose from a different crowd when the second bucket was filled. I took care to keep my hands on the chalice base and continued pouring mana until the fifth bucket had been filled. That'll be enough, mine. At the high priest's words, I finally took my hands off the tilted chalice, which was then positioned upward again, before the high priest set me back down to the stage. I stood in the center, having been the one to offer up my mana. Sylvester and the high priest standing up one step behind me to either side. Praise be to the gods, shouted the high priest. I reflexively made a sharp praying pose, and so too did all those in the field. The townsfolk were probably used to performing this pose every year. They made it a lot more naturally than anyone in the lower city did. Thus concludes the spring prayer. Show the gods your obedience and live properly with the new life that has been granted, declared the high priest to much cheer and elation, all while Sylvester wrapped the chalice in a cloth and stuffed it back into his bag. Once that was done, the high priest summoned his stone beast, high beast, and the two jumped onto its back. We must head to our next destination, for we are quite busy this year. May you all be blessed by the gods. The high priest circled his white lion around the crowd once, gold dust sprinkling down onto them. Meanwhile, Karstad and Daniel summoned their own high beasts. Daniel picked me up and set me onto his winged horse, which spread its wings before soaring up into the sky, putting the farming town far behind us. After that, we traveled to the winter mansions of 4 different farming towns, completing the spring prayer at each of them. By the time we were done, the sun was setting and I was exhausted. Now we just need to reach where we'll be staying. Apprentice, don't fall asleep. You'll fall off, chastised Daniel, and I nodded my droopy head while squeezing the reins. Mine, wake up. What? I woke to the high priest's sharp voice and looked around, finding myself in front of a large estate. Where is this place? Baron Blonde's summer mansion. According to the high priest, nobles entrusted with land by the Archduke stayed in their mansions near the farming villages from spring prayer all the way to the harvest festival. They returned to the nobles' quarter during the winter to pay taxes and give a report on the last year, while all the nobles in the city got to work gathering information on everything that happened over the past year. The building over there is where the nobles live, while the visiting priests stay in this estate, said the high priest continued. Since priests visit every year during the spring prayer and the harvest festival, nobles with land in the duchy had estates prepared for visiting nobles to stay inside. You could say it was a means of keeping priests separate from them, since although they were born from nobles, they were technically not nobles themselves. As evidence of this, the priests would only be met with a representative when they arrived. That was it. The noble wouldn't even come out to greet them. I believe Arnold has already prepared the greeting and had them open the box for us. The estate had several carriages parked out front, and the fact that they were all empty allowed me to conclude that our belongings had already been carried inside. Welcome. Our attendants greeted us together when we opened the door to the estate. There were several faces I didn't recognize, but I could imagine that they were Sylvester's attendants. Arnold alone walked forward and whispered to the high priest, "We would like to prepare for the meal, but there are only 2 dining halls. What shall we do? We will all eat together in the large dining hall. However, ensure that mine and Sylvester are seated far apart from each other. As you wish." A farming town wouldn't yet have enough food to support an entire entourage of priests and their attendants so soon after winter hibernation. They would sell us some vegetables, eggs, and milk, but we had to bring some of our own grain and oil. That was the one reason why the priests who stayed behind didn't want to go to the spring prayer. Now then, everyone, dress yourselves up and gather in the dining hall. At the high priest's announcement, the attendants all headed to their respective masters. In my case, Rosina and Fran came hurrying over to me. The sight of them made me feel like I was home again. "Welcome, Sister Mine. Let us first change your clothes." They guided me to a prepared room. Priests generally traveled in pairs, and a third fancy room would occasionally be prepared for the unusual case where a third priest tagged along. This time, Kartstedt, Sylvester, and the high priest were using the fancy rooms, while Daniel and I, lower status as we were, stayed in rooms that were meant for servants. "This may be rough for you, Sir Daniel, but this room is larger than my house. I do not feel out of place here at all." The room may have been on the lower end of the scale for nobles, but it was much bigger than an apartment in the lower city. It didn't inconvenience me at all. Just having the carpet and sheets that had been brought from my director's chambers was more than enough for me. Fran brought in a tub of water, which I used to bathe with Rosina's assistance. It felt amazing since I had spent almost the entire day outside. Once I was clean, Rosina selected clothes the color of fresh grass for me and put the fancy cloth shoes that had just been made for me onto my feet. Out of the many hair sticks I had prepared for the spring prayer, Rosina selected the one Tuli made over the winter. It had yellow, orange, and yellow-green flowers arranged to look like blossoms. Those were the colors of spring. Hugo and Ella worked quite hard on this meal. They said that they would not allow themselves to be overshadowed by the other chefs. In that case, I will have to give this meal my all as well. Having a meal with those of noble status would be nothing but suffering for me. Rosina and Fran had beaten noble manners into my head over the winter, but I was sure that Kartstedt, as my future adoptive father, would be closely watching my every move to see how much a commoner could do. There was also Sylvester to worry about. Who knew what he might say? If he were actually an elementary school boy, then I could just ignore him. But as he was someone of higher status, noble birth, I couldn't risk that. "May I return to my room once we finished eating? If you are invited to a post-meal gathering, you are of too low status to refuse." That gives me a bad feeling. Yeah. Oh, boy. One thing Fran and Rosina didn't tell her, with all this noble manners stuff, is that if a noble takes an interest in your food, you have to give them your entire plate and let them eat until they're satisfied. That's the one thing they didn't tell her. Or at least the one thing that I know of that they didn't tell her. Why they wouldn't tell her? I don't know. The meal was served in the larger dining hall. Everyone was dressed up. The high priest was wearing his own personal clothes, which was quite the treat since I only ever seen him in priest robes or a full set of armor. The clothes were droopy with the hanging sleeves expected of noble clothing. Sylvester I had likewise only seen in his priest robes, but since I had only met him today, I didn't consider the sight of him wearing personal clothes anywhere near as momentous. "You certainly do look just like a noble's daughter when you're wearing clothes like that," said Kartstedt after seeing me. "It should be safe to assume that that's a compliment." I'm glad he didn't reject me on the spot or get disappointed with me. I thank you for the compliment, Lord Cardstead. I can see the fruits of her winter training, noted the High Priest. Her conduct and speech have very much improved, though her frank displays of emotion could still use some work. Well, considering she's a commoner and she hasn't been here for, a year? Give her a little slack. She's having to get used to everything, all of this, plus dealing with all the stuff she's been doing. It's kind of impressive that she has this much noble manners after just less than a year. He always followed up his compliments with some sort of criticism, so it's hard to feel like he was ever actually complimenting me. Sister mine, here is your seat. Fran guided me to a chair and served me my food. How come you get different food than the rest of us? Sylvester asked, after seeing the bowl in front of me. Perhaps because the meals were made by different chefs, I suggested. Fran, do you know? Fran lowered his voice and explained, of the two kitchens here, Hugo and Ella have been given the smaller one to use, while the larger one was used for making normal noble food. It seems that my food was prepared at a separate kitchen. Given my small number of attendants, it makes sense that my chefs would use a smaller kitchen. I was fine with that since it meant I got to eat food I was used to, but Sylvester, sitting in the seat furthest away from mine, was looking my way with eyes full of curiosity. That smells pretty good. Yes, my chefs are quite talented. Everyone now had their food in front of them, so we crossed our arms and offered a prayer. O mighty King and Queen of the endless skies, who doth grace us with thousands upon thousands of lives to consume, O mighty eternal five who rule the mortal realm, I offer thanks and prayers to thee, and do take part in the meal so graciously provided. The moment I took my first bite, Sylvester yelled, what do you eat? Why are you eating it? Have no idea what he meant. I just cocked my head to the side in confusion. Why wouldn't I? Yeah, here we go. Sylvester expressed interest in your food, mine, said the High Priest with a shrug. Did he not compliment the smell? It seemed that Sylvester had been demanding I give him my food, using the roundabout euphemism that nobles love so much. I hadn't noticed at all. I won't give you away all of it. You can have half. I mean, heck, you take food from a little girl? Dude! I don't care who the frick you are. Taking food from a noble girl who had just offered up her mana like that, that's cruel. Or not a noble girl. She's not noble yet. Little girl. A little girl. A really little girl. Only half? Sylvester looked at me in disbelief like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But I was the one at a loss. This is my food. A proud blue priest of noble status such as yourself wouldn't take all the food a poor commoner girl has, would you? Of course I wouldn't. Of course. I don't think he would. Even if you had given him your plate, I don't think he would have taken the whole thing. In the end, Sylvester settled with half of my food, his curiosity getting the better of him. It seemed that although half-empty plates were sometimes given to attendants, nobody gave away just half of whatever they were eating to someone. Cardstead and the High Priest gave exasperated sighs as they rubbed their temples, while Daniel was frozen in place with an expression straight out of the Scream. According to what the High Priest later told me, when someone expressed interest in your food, it was customary for you to then offer them your plate and then wait for them to pass it back down to you. In other words, I should have just given him my food and my bowl and waited. And so giving him half was the wrong answer, huh? Darn. Well, like I said, that was the one thing Fran and Rosina never told you. Why did they not tell you that could happen? Jeez. I guess maybe that it got lost or something and got lost in all the explanations? Once he finished the soup I had given him, Sylvester demanded with shining eyes that I hand over my chefs as well. But thanks to Cardstead and the High Priest stepping in, I managed to finish the meal without any harm nor foul. I silently thanked the two for keeping our seats separated, then stood up. I must be taking my leave now. I shall leave you to your business. I said my farewells to the men as they prepared for their after-meal gathering and tried to quickly return to my room. But Sylvester glared at me with his deep green eyes like a predator eyeing his prey. He beckoned me over. Hold it, mine. You're coming with us. We've got to talk a little more about trading chefs. Of course he hasn't given up on it yet. Well, you can't give up the chefs. They're not even yours. They're Benno's. An after-meal invitation. High Priest, I would hope that you know you are too low in status to decline. I turned to the High Priest for help since the invitation gave me a really bad feeling, but he shot me down without a second thought. I mean, these guys would keep him from getting violent, don't worry. This is a gathering of nobles, after all. A commoner like me would never have the right to refuse. I know that, but it was worth a shot. Come here, mine. Despite the High Priest having gone out of his way to seat us apart from each other, Sylvester patted the space on the table between him and Cardstead, signaling for me to sit beside him. Oh, great. I paused, unsure of what to do, since there wasn't actually anywhere for me to sit, but Karstedt and Daniel both stood and began to change seats, telling me to just give up. Mine, walk around the table as Daniel did and sit next to Sylvester. The high priest gave my back a regretful push, knowing that Sylvester's order wasn't something that could be refused. Excuse me. I walked around the dining hall's large table and, having no other choice, sat down next to Sylvester. Karstedt was on my other side, so I scooted towards him on my chair as subtly as I could manage. Daniel was sitting opposite to me, and the high priest was opposite to Sylvester. Listen, mine, Sylvester began. How about we trade chefs? You'd be fine with that, right? It's not stealing, it's trading. No, you ain't getting my chefs. I don't even own them, they're my bosses. Or, not boss, my financial guardians' chefs. But those were Benno's chefs. He would definitely be mad if I traded them without his permission, and the potential of our recipes leaking would be a big problem. The chefs are being lent to me by someone else. I cannot agree to trade them on my own. Then I'll negotiate with that someone. Who is it? Benno wasn't in a position where he could refuse an order from a noble, but it would be a disaster if the Italian restaurant he devoted so many resources to could no longer open due to a lack of cooking staff. I could already imagine Benno and Mark's agonizing headaches as they watched their investments drain away to nothingness. Brother Sylvester, a humble merchant could not refuse a request made by one of noble status such as yourself. You would not come to him to negotiate, but rather to make an unreasonable demand he could not refuse. Yeah, I guess it would end up like that with a merchant, murmured Sylvester, a flash of amusement in his eyes. It seemed that the high priest was right when he said that Sylvester had a good heart buried extremely, extremely deep within him. He didn't explode with anger or at my observation. In fact, he raised his chin a little, gesturing for me to continue. I glanced at the high priest, who offered a subtle nod. Daniel was trembling beside him, his face a ghostly shade of white, but it wasn't just an option for me to lose my chefs here. My chefs are due to work at an eatery that is planned to open soon. They are in training for that now, and a lot of money has been spent on both training them and preparing the eatery. The sum may not be much to a member of the nobility, but it is an amount that can mean life or death to a commoner. Would you still take the chefs, knowing that doing so would destroy that restaurant, Brother Sylvester? If you like their cooking so much, I would ask that you instead wait for the eatery to open and become a customer there. Oh, an eatery? You're saying commoners are going to eat that food? Sylvester's eyes widened in disbelief, and with a smile just like the one Benno gave his best customers, I took the opportunity to advertise the restaurant. The prices will be expensive enough that only those known as wealthy in the lower city will be able to afford them, and only those recommended by existing customers will be served. The dining area is modeled after the mansion of a noble and will provide food similar to that which nobles eat, or rather, it will provide food that not even nobles have eaten. Yeah, and who's going to introduce me? Since you seem interested, I will introduce you to them myself. In all honesty, I really didn't want to bear who would surely be the enormous responsibility of introducing an unpredictable grade schooler like Sylvester to the restaurant. But it was better than him stealing our chefs and ruining everything. Alright, introduce me then. I'll give the place a look. And thank you ever so much, Lord Karstedt. High Priest, would you like to come as well? I pleaded with my eyes that I wanted someone to keep Sylvester under control, and they both reluctantly nodded at the same time. Brother Sylvester is kind of a noble, so maybe Benno will appreciate this. Or maybe he'll hate it. I wonder which. Either way, I want him to appreciate that I was the one who peacefully stopped his chefs from getting stolen away. As I silently praised myself for my heroic efforts, the high priest, a glass of wine, and some simple snacks like ham and cheese in hand, suddenly raised his head as though he had just remembered something. Mind, why not have Rosina play the harpspiel for us? He asked, which reminded me that he had allowed her to bring the harpspiel in the first place so that she could provide a source of great comfort during the long nights. I called Frayne over with a glance and told him to tell Rosina that we wanted her to play the harpspiel. Karstedt widened his eyes at my words. A commoner has a harpspiel? The high priest told me I should learn how to play it. I told him about how the high priest had ordered my education, which made Karstedt murmur, so he's already begun his preparations. I would expect nothing less of Lord Ferdinand. Considering that the high priest had said nothing of me being adopted by a noble at that point, one could say that his foresight was impressive indeed. Well, whether it be adopted by a noble or married to a noble, it still would have required the same kind of education, so it just kind of changed somewhat. Mine has a talent for music. You have been keeping up your practice, correct? Rosina is just a talented teacher, that's all. The high priest directed his praise at me, but Rosina was the one enforcing my practice. She wouldn't let me skip it no matter how much I wanted to, and anyone who practiced an instrument daily would get better at it. The only reason my piano skills didn't improve during my Arano days was because I didn't practice every day. I have answered your summons, mistress. Rosina arrived with the harpspiel. A chair from the dining table had been pulled aside for her, and she sat upon it with a broad smile. Then she played song after song requested by Sylvester. Fantastic. How did a Grey Shrine Maiden like yourself learn to play Harpspiel so well? I was merely provided the opportunity to dedicate myself to the fine arts by my previous mistress, Sister Christine. Interesting. Alright, mine, your turn. Personally, I thought it was pretty cool to ask me to play right after everyone had heard Rosina. We weren't even comparable to each other. I hurriedly searched for a reason I could use to turn him down. I'm afraid I'm much too small to play the adult-sized Harpspiel. Oh, fear not, Sister Vine. I brought your Harpspiel as well, just in case something like this occurred. Please allow me a moment while I fetch it from your room. No, Rosina, why? I slumped over in despair. Karsta gave me a comforting pat on the back, holding back laughter, while Sylvester, who was also grinning, looked away from me to the High Priest. All right, you go ahead and play while we wait, Ferdinand. I was sure the High Priest was going to refuse, but instead he stood up, picked up the Harpspiel with a single annoyed sigh, then started to play. The ease with which he could follow up with the likes of Rosina was actually pretty impressive, but he had chosen to play the anime song I had taught him. The arrangement made it a little hard to recognize, and the lyrics had been swapped out for religious ones, but it was still an anime song. I struggled to contain my laughter, feeling as though my sides were about to explode as I listened to him play. To think that a little prank I pulled would come back to bite at me like this. I've never heard that song before, observed Sylvester. I would expect not, the High Priest casually replied, which made Sylvester frown. What song was that? Who composed it? That is a secret. The High Priest glanced my way, an arrogant grin spread across his face. I let out a quiet gasp. Sylvester, who was sitting next to me, raised an eyebrow, his green eyes gleaming. I didn't want you to publicize it, but don't tease him like that either. Now he's all interested, I can tell. As a storm of panic ravaged me on the inside, Rosina returned with a small Harpspiel. Here you are, Sister mine. Thank you, Rosina. I strummed and chose to play a simple practice song I had learned. I made sure not to play one from my Arano days, so that would have been digging my own grave. I sure have grown. You're all right, but not that great. I believe it is your turn to play, Brother Sylvester. I would like to hear your music. I was surrounded by the artistically gifted, Rosina, Wilma, and the High Priest, so I had no idea what was expected from an average noble. Now seemed like a good opportunity to figure that out by having Sylvester play. So you really want to hear my Harpspiel playing, huh? Alright, consider yourself lucky. I'll play. Sylvester confidently picked up the Harpspiel, but judging by his behavior and attitude, it was hard for me to imagine he was at all musically inclined. Though, as it turned out, looks can be deceiving. He was far more talented than I expected. He gently strummed away, his singing voice hitting all the right notes. Why couldn't they put that in an anime? I would have loved to have heard that. Nobles are all way too high level. I had been hoping for proof that the High Priest was asking too much of me, but in the end, all I got was confirmation that nobles really were insanely skilled. Would you like to play as well, Lord Scart said? I'm not much of a Harpspiel player. Maybe if I had my flute up, but I neglected to bring it. In a shocking twist, it seemed that even a buff military man like Karsta could play an instrument, though he preferred to use an instrument that made use of the lung capacity he had built up through his training, rather than one that just required him to strum thin strings. Wow, that's kind of cool. But far be it from me to sit and do nothing after everyone else has performed. I suppose the only thing I can perform here and now is a sword dance. A sword dance? I've never seen one of those. I would love to see yours if you would. Not even in my Arano days had I seen an actual sword dance. I looked up at Karsta, my eyes sparkling with anticipation. He called over Daniel with a nod, then took out his shining wand and murmured, "Schwert." In an instant, the wand turned into a sword. The two men faced each other, lightly tapped the tips of their blades together, and then thrust them up into the air. That was the signal to start. They both began cutting through the air, their deadly blades gleaming as they danced in an even tempo, moving fluidly and without any wasted energy. Apparently, the sword dance was used as a way to practice the 7 different basic moves it was composed of, and it could be expected that everyone in the Knight's Order was capable of executing it. But when performing it without rehearsing first, as Karsta and Daniel were, one had to carefully observe the other's movements and their line of sight to move in unison. Falling out of sync was dangerous to them both. Oh, definitely considering they're using swords here. One wrong move and you could get skewered. Or worse. Sweat was beading on Daniel's forehead, and his breathing was getting heavier. Noticing that, Karsta pulled back his sword, a composed expression on his face. That should do it. Amazing, Lord Karsta, Sir Daniel. You're both amazing. I was so scared one of you would get hurt, but you finished with aplomb. I continued to let loose a flood of compliments, but Sylvester protested, saying he could do that much himself, and then immediately started sword dancing with Karsta. Can I go back to my room now? Sylvester looked pretty cool too as he performed the sword dance with a deadly serious expression. I could tell from their speed alone that this was a higher level sword dance than the last one. But really, that just annoyed me. That was pretty cool, huh? Go ahead, lavish me your praise. Sylvester crowed, his chest proudly puffed out. Yeah, he's fishing for compliments. But why, though? We don't know. The sword dance was over, and I could see once again, from the bottom of my heart, that I found him annoying. So annoying. He was already back to his usual grade school self. Any semblance of coolness in all my awe for him was blown away in an instant. You were splendid, Brother Sylvester. Wow, so monotone. Try again. He forced me to repeat my praise 3 times, at which point he was such a pain to deal with that I faked feeling sick just so I had an excuse to hurry back to the room I had been given. That was 2 chapters, I think. Okay. I think I'll do the next one probably later or tomorrow. I'll see you guys next time.